Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Welcome, everybody. Today I am privileged to have Maestro Leonard Slatkin with us. And this is a rather long bio that I'm going to read, but I want those of you who are listening to know the accomplishments of Maestro Leonard Slatkin, who is my guest today. Internationally acclaimed conductor Leonard Slatkin is music director laureate of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, director musical honoraire of the Orchestre Nationale de Lyon, France, obviously, although my pronunciation won't give you that impression, and conductor laureate of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. He maintains a rigorous schedule of guest conducting throughout the world and is active as a composer, author, and educator. Maestro Slatkin has received 6 Grammy Awards and 34 nominations. He has recorded the complete Brahms, Beethoven, and Tchaikovsky symphonies. Maestro Slatkin has held posts as music director of the New Orleans Symphony, St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C., and he was chief conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra in London. He has conducted virtually all the leading orchestras in the world. Among those in America are the New York Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony, Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Elsewhere, he has worked with all 5 London orchestras, the Berlin Philharmonic, Munich's Bayerische Rundfunk, the Royal Stockholm Philharmonic Orchestra, Amsterdam's Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, etc., etc. And his opera conducting has taken him to the Metropolitan Opera, the Lyric Opera of Chicago, Washington National Opera. The list just goes on and on. This is really incredible. Founder and former director of the St. Louis Symphony Youth Orchestra and National Conducting Institute in Washington, D.C., Maestro Slatkin remains a passionate music director. He has conducted and taught at such institutions as the Manhattan School of Music, the Juilliard School, and the Aspen Music Festival, among other places. And of course, you can read more about him online. Okay, so.
I'm tired. And that was just yesterday, all that.
You're right. So here are my questions for you. Your career intersected just once with mine.
Yes.
My small career compared to yours. It was an honor for me to share the stage with you exactly 1 year after William Schumann's passing in a memorial tribute at the Juilliard School. You conducted something of his. I don't remember what it was. You might with the Juilliard Orchestra, and I conducted my professional choir, the New York Virtuoso Singers, in his Carols of Death. Years earlier, when I first met Bill Schumann, I told him that that piece was one of the best choral works of the 20th century. And he said that I was in good company because Robert Shaw had told him the same thing. Now, at that time, I actually knew only about 1/10 of the modern choral repertoire that I know now, but I still think these pieces are sublime. Do you remember what you conducted then?
Actually, I don't, because not only did I do that concert as part of it, but several years later, I did a tribute to Bill with the Juilliard Orchestra in what was then Fisher Hall. That I know was the Third Symphony, the American Festival Overture, and the Violin Concerto. I'm going to guess that I probably did the New England Triptych on that concert. That would have made the most sense. That was his most popular piece, one that's heard quite often now, worldwide, played obviously on patriotic celebrations, but a very fitting tribute to Bill, as he was one of the pioneers of resurrecting choral music from the early part of compositional history in this country, taking the piece from William Billings.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
People might not realize that he won the Pulitzer, and he was really
He won it twice, actually.
Twice, unbelievable. It was really an amazing composer.
And then, of course, he was president of Juilliard, but also the first president of Lincoln Center. He was an amazing man. Really, I got to know him very well, and I was honored and so grateful to have the time I had with him.
Yes, I met him only a few times, but I was honored to have him on my board of advisors. When I first my chorus, my professional chorus, I didn't have funding, and I said to him, I'm thinking of making it 12 singers, and he said, no, a chorus is 16 or more.
Yeah,
So because of him, I'm in debt every year because my chorus is so large. No, I'm only kidding. But he was a sweet man,
he
and
was.
I'm lucky to know him that well. Is it true that virtually every member, if not every member of the Juilliard Orchestra, either goes on to become a player in a major orchestra or have a solo career? And
Well, I don't know if that's the case now. The school is quite large, and a lot of people study one thing and then move into some other aspect of their lives. A lot of people who start out as musicians, very good ones, actually find that they're not comfortable as performers, so they either become teachers or many surprisingly go into the medical profession. Maybe not surprisingly, since we can see a relationship between music and pulse. And the difference is that the doctors just try to keep the patient alive and we bring them back to life.
right, that's interesting.
When I was a student at Indiana University, which was back in the 60s, there were 1,500 music education majors.
Oh my, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I knew there were 1,500 or 1,800 students, and there are like eight
most of them were in music ed.
recitals a day there. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's hopefully, there'll be a turnaround and there'll be more music education in schools then.
Well, that's the chief issue, isn't it? It has been for the last almost 50 years now, where we've seen this decline in education programs in our, particularly in our public schools.
Hmm.
When I first arrived in Detroit, I met the then acting director of the public schools, and he boasted that 30% of Detroit public school students had music in their schools. And I said, wait a minute, that means 70% don't.
Oh,
So,
shame. What a shame. Well, you mentioned music education. I'm in awe of what Venezuela had, El Sistema, which produced Dudamel as a conductor.
yes.
And I heard on YouTube their best orchestra, Venezuela's top youth orchestra, play at the proms in
Yes.
London, and they were sensational.
But by the time they started doing that, a lot of their people had graduated out of the orchestra and were now professional musicians both there and around the world. And we admire the system, it's great, but it really only goes to a very, very small point of the population. In some ways, what Gustavo is doing in Los Angeles is a little more the ethic that the founder of the Bolivar Orchestra, Abreu, had in mind, where he could deal with 1,500, 2,000 young people. The Bolivar Orchestra itself is, 100, 120 kids, but they're remarkable.
Yeah,
And we don't know yet what their futures will bring, if they're going to go on to bigger musical careers, but it's still in its infancy, and we
right,
admire anything that's done in the area of education.
right. What is it like to face an orchestra as a guest conductor as opposed to working week after week, year after year with your own?
You sound like they're the enemies. I'm going to face them now. We're going to go 2 out of 3 falls.
Right.
um, well, the music director is a different kind of animal. That's why some orchestras actually delineate music director and conductor. So they're two separate jobs. The music director is responsible for the day-to-day operations on an annual basis. We are responsible for hiring people in the orchestra, settling all the programming, engaging the soloists, dealing with fundraising, working with the board, working in the community. When you're a guest, I'm not going to say it's easier, but you have less responsibility.
Right.
All you have to really do is show up and do the best you can for the music that you're conducting. Obviously, you have to make an adjustment from week to week. The instrumental soloist shows up and they play the violin or piano, and that's it. All it is, the pianist has to adjust to the instrument. But a conductor has to psychologically make that adjustment to the orchestra itself in terms of how you deal with them, what you say to them. You have to adjust to the sound. You have to adjust to the acoustic of the room that you're in. And all that's done in very, very short order, maybe 2 days, sometimes 3. So there's a lot to do in a very short amount of time.
And
I'm only guest conducting now. I did music director for 50 years, and that was enough. I
yeah,
felt I'd accomplished what I needed to. And now, assuming that we get to a point where we do get back to work, it will really just be seeing primarily orchestras that I know, but also working a little more in educational institutions and with orchestras that I maybe haven't seen ever in my life. And that's actually intriguing. I enjoy this coming to an orchestra very fresh and learning from them. There's so much wonderful experience to be had when it's something you encounter. Like I went to China for the first time to conduct a Chinese orchestra, maybe 10, 11 years ago, I guess.
Mhm.
And it was so different, uh, to really work with them and instruct them to some degree and how I wanted the sound to be. So like starting from scratch, here's your palette, here's the colors. Now let's put them on the canvas and see what we can come up with.
Right, but also for them, they must have been very excited. I mean, to have you there.
Well, I don't know. I guess they were. They were certainly interested enough in the music we were doing. And there are always people in pretty much every orchestra around the world where you either have met them before someplace else, either as students or in orchestras that they might have played in, or people who know people you know. There are always people who come up to you, and it's wonderful. That whole thing about music being the international language is true on that level. It's not so true when we come to what the music itself has to say, which is actually a very national language.
Mhm.
You may not be able to speak Hungarian, but you hear Bartok or Kodai, you know where they're from right away.
Right. Uh, Now, on the other hand, have you been in situations where, as a guest conductor, you bring your own interpretation to, let's say, a Beethoven symphony, and the players are used to doing it their own way, causing somewhat friction or unpleasantry?
Well, I think that you have to make the adjustment. It's a little bit like saying, we would like you to be a guest in our home, but please don't move the furniture.
Mhm.
You you come in, you have your idea about how you want it to go, how you want it to sound, but you don't want to disrupt what are inherently the great qualities of the orchestra you're working with. When I debuted with the Philadelphia Orchestra, which at the time was under the direction of Eugene Ormandy, Maestro Ormandy was there. He introduced me to the orchestra. And we were doing, as the major work, the Second Symphony of Rachmaninoff, which for that orchestra was a house piece. They owned it.
Mhm.
And I realized that my job was to just stay out of the way in many cases, learn from all the experience they had, but at the same time, try to give them an idea of my tempos, my little gradations and dynamics, phrasing here and there. So you do a little bit of a balancing act. And if you're any good, you'll come up with a really good unified set of responses.
Mhm. And I would imagine that people our age, conductors our age, would, elicit more immediate respect just because they know we've been around the block and we've had successes, rather than somebody in their 20s straight out of school.
Yeah, it's true, but you do encounter an orchestra once in a while that says, okay, show us what you got, no matter what age you are.
Right.
Uh, and your job is just to be as prepared as possible, come in with as thorough knowledge of the score as you can have, but at the same time, listen as the musicians play, listen to their ideas. And I think when you have that cooperative and collaborative feeling, then you're going to be fine. It's when you set up the confrontation yourself by saying, I know you play it this way, but I think it should go this way.
Yeah.
That's just not to be done. Don't do that.
Right. I understand. I don't want to keep you too long. I just
It's
have
okay.
things. Do you know that you and I both commissioned Roberto Sierra to write his Misa Latina? In a
Did it
sense,
as well. What was yours for?
I'll explain it to you what I mean. Well, you and the St. Louis Orchestra, I believe,
Washington.
Washington, commissioned him to write out came the Misa Latina,
Mhm.
a fabulous piece.
Yeah.
So I heard a recording of the piece, and I said to myself, I really have to do this, but I don't have the means to get together an orchestra or a large chorus. So I commissioned him to write a chamber version,
Oh,
which he did. Two pianos and a host of percussion instruments,
yeah.
which I never heard before. And he did it, and I performed it, and that's why I say we both commissioned him to write the same
Yeah,
piece.
I understand. That's what a great idea. I think there's a huge opportunity, given what we've all been going through. We've had these bizarre socially distanced concerts that are on Zoom and YouTube and all that. I'm not so keen on those, but I am interested in the idea that we've had in many cases for live performance to reduce the size of our forces,
Right.
whether they're vocal or certainly instrumental. The other day, I was talking to the head of the Opera Theater here in St. Louis. We were just going on about the conflict with the stagehands at the Met. It's a big problem right now, and everybody's suffering.
Yeah.
Little if no income, and we have to do the most we can to help them out. And I talked about having seen a production in Stockholm about 25 years ago of Turandot, the largest and grandest of Puccini's operas. Huge forces involved, big orchestra, chorus, millions of little things going on. But they did it in a small house with 25 people all together, including members of the cast playing some of the instruments. And I was entranced by it. I thought it was just great. And then I wondered, for those of us who have smaller forces, especially in the opera house, we know that there are reductions of many of the major operas, Puccini operas, Verdi, so forth and so on. And I thought, wouldn't it be sort of interesting to create a chamber-sized version of the Ring cycle?
Okay.
After all, there's not a lot of chorus in the Ring.
Right.
Mostly an intimate work dealing with the protagonists and outlaws going after each other, family jealousies, sexual tension, all that kind of stuff. But it's mostly conversational. If somebody clever could reduce it for smaller size chamber orchestra, perhaps supplementing it with a synthesizer for some of the bigger effects you need, I think it would open up that kind of repertoire to companies that never ever envisioned it. And you've got fabulous people out there who can do this.
What a great.
After all, you said, what's the commission fee? It's just to orchestrate it. That's all. The music already exists. Can't be that much.
What a great idea. Well, didn't Stravinsky have to do that? Was it after?
Well, Rake's Progress was already smaller anyway, but he would reduce like Rite of Spring, Petrushka certainly. He would make them smaller, but the reason for that mostly had to do with retaining the copyrights. So he would do it when the copyright was about to expire and come out with a new version, so he could get the money for it.
Oh, see, in the music history textbooks, it doesn't say that. It doesn't mention that. It just meant they were reduced.
Yeah, he was rather avaricious.
Yes, and also, I read that he promoted his career even in an advanced age. I mean, why not?
Oh, yeah. I saw him, I guess the last concert that he conducted was in New York. And in many ways, it was very sad. This frail man came out and he led New York premiere of 2 or 3 recent pieces, mostly in the 12-tone style. And when he came out at first, the audience greeted him warmly, as they should. But when the pieces concluded, it was kind of tepid. And I thought, here's this incredible figure from what was then our time, only being received mildly. Whereas years ago, it was adulation. Everybody couldn't wait for the next Stravinsky piece. I thought that was just a bit sad.
And why do you think that was?
I guess, well, at that time, people were really not accepting of this latter phase of Stravinsky's compositional output, a little more thorny to listen to. Harmonies were not as clearly defined, very little in the melodic way that we consider to be singable melodic, although it was there. It's changed now, but when you think about it, I guess Stravinsky was always thought of in the last century as being the giant, more so than Schoenberg, certainly. He was going to be the Beethoven of the 20th century. And here we are, 1/5 of the way through the 21st, and we just hear the kind of Stravinsky's greatest hits on a regular basis. It's not like the bulk of his repertoire and music output is performed. It's a little bit frightening when you think about what the expectation was.
Well, yeah, especially because he was quite famous in his 20s with the three ballet scores.
But he stayed that way right through his early West Coast time. But once he'd written, I guess, in the 1940s and 50s, the music of the late 50s and 60s just never caught on. I don't know if it will. It'll always have its proponents and champions, but I'm not so certain it was something that the public ever grasped.
Wow. It reminds me a little bit of Lucille Ball in her very late years when she tried to make a comeback on TV and it failed. I mean,
That last television series was horrible.
Oh, but what a shame.
Well, it happens. Sometimes we get to a point and we think we can go on, and we don't step back and look to say, maybe it's time to just pack it in and do something else.
Right.
I know that when I stepped down from being a music career, I knew it was time not to run an orchestra anymore. So I
Oh,
stayed in Detroit for 10 years, and I had some offers to do other directorships, but I really didn't want to do this any longer. I
yeah.
just
Well,
wanted to focus on the music.
as you say, you've done it. You've done it all, and it's very demanding to be a music
It
director.
is
Uh,
stressful.
yeah.
And my doctors have said, get rid of the stress.
Yeah. Good.
I get to talk to you, which is nice.
Well, thank you very much. And you conduct without a baton a lot?
Sometimes, sometimes. Uh, I think every conductor needs to be able to conduct without, simply because if it flies out of your hand, that's it. So you have to be prepared. But as I developed, I found that what we would call the linear part, this, you tell people, watch the tip of the baton. You can't. It goes too fast. So you're really watching this part. Then I thought, okay, well, if you're watching that part, well, can't I be a little more like that instead? So I use it particularly though in slow movements where I don't want the feeling of pulse or martial music. So it's for me an option when I have a big, long, slow movement to do. I'll just put the baton down. Even sometimes if I'm doing a piece from memory, I'll take the baton and slide it into the folder of the cellos, whoever happens to be sitting on the outside, just because I think I get a better sound with my hands. All of a sudden I have 9 more batons.
Yeah. I also find I can be more expressive with my hands. I just,
Well, a choral conductor is a different matter. The choral, remember, the chorus has a big advantage over the orchestral forces in that the chorus sees what the orchestra does via the piano part and what the other members of the chorus do. The orchestra only sees the individual line they have. So the conductor's job with an orchestra is to explain what's happening while you're playing that. That's really a very vital function for the conductor, to inform the orchestra of what they have to hear.
interesting. I've only used baton maybe 10 or 12 times in my whole life, and
Mm.
it's when they're very big chorus and orchestra, and or the piece is 3 hours long
Or the distance between yourself and the forces is so great that you need to have some focus.
exactly. And finally, you mentioned in this discussion about the baton. I'm wondering, I notice, generally speaking, that players are behind the beat. Orchestra players are behind the beat, and then so when I work with chorus and orchestra together, the first thing I tell them is play on the beat.
Play
Where
around the beat. That's right.
why does that happen? Where did that happen?
Well, I think there are a couple reasons. One of them is that I can. This is my mug of batons, by the way. uh, and one of the reasons is that often conductors, the stick will come down a little bit ahead of the wrist, like that, and the people playing don't know what to follow because they're really looking at this. You don't think they are, but they are. So that's one reason. Another one, I'm sure it's not the case with you, but a lot of conductors don't breathe. They go, and you need to feel every time. Breath is the critical thing. If you take a breath and come down, you will get automatically a better sound. The best way to do it is to ask the strings, if you're not able to get that, if you feel they're not together or not playing with the beat the way you want it, say, what I'd like to do is have you play a pizzicato. It doesn't matter what note, just you're going to play a pizzicato and you're going to play it on my downbeat. And you do this and you get it. Now, if it's still not right, you say, please watch, because I'm going to start at this line. I'm going to go up a certain degree. And in the same amount of time I went up, I'm going to come down and land back on the line. So they need to see this point of impact always. Then after that, you say, okay, let's try it again. But now I'm not going to come down, but play the pizzicato. And you go, and you stop. And hopefully everybody feels that the length of your upbeat, the point you get to, and its decline point are all the same, and you will get that pizzicato together. Also, it forces people to listen to each other.
Right. And I love talking about gravity when I teach conducting, and a nice arch. Yeah, this is very important.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I learned a couple of things here. So
So did I.
thank you so
I
much.
learned I had the second best hands. Like,
Well, thank you. It's been a great honor, really.
My
And
pleasure. Thank you very much, and all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, get the shot when it comes
Yep.
around to be your turn.
I will. Thank you so much, Maestro.
Okay, bye-bye.